It just seems such an unlikely story, but it is 100% the truth. In 1963, Holman-Moody, the famed NASCAR team, built a small fleet of lightweight Galaxies to take on the Europeans at their own game and in their own backyard. And these were not NASCAR Grand National cars, they were legit FIA Group 2 touring cars.
Familiar opening scene at Crystal Palace, and the big Galaxie leading another clutch of 6 Cortinas.
Now this program was largely the brainchild of Jeff Arenne. Jeff formed a close relationship with Holman-Moody while managing the 1963 Monte Carlo rally program with the new Ford Falcon Sprint. And it's interesting, he felt the full-size Galaxie would make a better road racer than the compact Falcon. But anyway, it happened, and motor racing history is all the better for it. So the British Saloon Car Championship began in 1958 and it was run by the RAC. And Jaguar completely dominated. And by that I mean they didn't just win most of the races, they won all of them. From the first race in 1958 to the last race in 1962, Mark I and Mark II Jags won all of them. Every single one. And that continued for the first 4 races in 1963. Now, there was almost a blip in the Jaguar juggernaut. 2 years earlier, a bloke called Dan Gurney entered a Chevy Impala in the 1961 Silverstone International Trophy. The Impala was a 409 model with the bubble top roof. He had Bill Fowler and Bill Thomas prep the car and build the motor. And that's the same Bill Thomas that created the Cheetah GT sports car a couple of years later. Now they focused mainly on making the car strong and reliable. And they also focused on handling and braking. Anyway, Gurney put the Impala on pole at Silverstone, and then he dominated the race and looked to be cruising to a historic victory. But with less than 2 laps to run, a wheel broke and he was out. Now the team was already making plans to improve the Impala for its next outing, but then the RAC told them that they weren't invited back. Apparently, the Impala hadn't actually been homologated as an FIA Group 2 touring car. And Group 2 were the regs that the British Saloon Car Championship ran to. Now I've looked through the FIA homologation list and the 1961 Impala isn't on it, so maybe they had a case. But I suspect there were also some politics involved. Anyway, 2 years later, Ford made sure that the Galaxie was homologated as a Group 2 car. And there were a few spicy bits added to the homologation sheet. Now these included twin carbs, limited slip diff, and even disc brakes. Plus, the doors, fenders, hood and deck lid were all fiberglass. And the bumpers were made from alloy. Now most of these upgrades came from Ford's Superstock drag racing program, but they also aided the Group 2 touring car program. They used the fastback bodies which were introduced partway through the 1963 Galaxie model life, and hence they're known as 1963.5 Galaxies. The fastback roofs were added to give the Galaxies a higher top speed on the NASCAR ovals. And the Group 2 Galaxies also had full roll cages. Now, these were the very same cages that Holman-Moody installed in their NASCAR Grand National cars, and they were really advanced for 1963 touring car racing. Like, for example, the Jaguars didn't have roll cages at all. But whereas the Grand National Galaxies had stripped out cabins, the Group 2 regs demanded that the full interior and factory seats be retained. The roll cage had a central hoop that had brace bars running rearward through holes cut in the back seat. And there was another brace bar running forward of the hoop between the front seats. The 427Q big block motors were producing around 450 horsepower with a heap of torque, and they were backed by a T10 4-speed transmission. And they rolled on the same steel wheels with the double skin centres that the Grand National cars had. Now it's generally accepted that Holman-Moody built 4 of the Group 2 Galaxies. One went to Ford of France to contest the 1963 Tour de France Rally. The other 3 went to England to the John Wilmot Group, Alan Brown Racing and Sir Gawain Bailey. Now the John Wilmot Group owned a bunch of Ford dealerships and worked really closely with Ford of Britain. They raced Cobras, among other things, and built the one-off Wilmot Cobra Coupe. And John Wilmot went on to partner John Wyer a few years later to form JW Automotive, and they won Le Mans. Alan Brown was a former Formula One driver who went on to form his own Formula One team after he'd retired. He also ran a sports car program and a touring car program. Sir Gawain Bailey had previously been racing a Jag. He was a businessman and a baronet whose family owned Leeds Castle in Kent. So he was a gentleman racer, but a really good one. Anyway, the 1963 British Saloon Car Championship began with Jags winning the first 4 races. But then in round 5 at Silverstone, the Wilmot and Bailey Galaxies arrived. Jack Sears was driving the Wilmot car and he qualified fastest against an army of Jaguars. And in the 12-lap race, he powered ahead to win by more than 20 seconds. And with that, the Jaguar reign was over. It was crazy. These were such unlikely touring cars and they just sort of wafted, but they were so incredibly effective. Anyway, Sears won the next race at Crystal Palace and then the next one at the Silverstone British Grand Prix event. And the Alan Brown Galaxie made its debut at the Grand Prix event, with Denny Hulme driving. Jim Clark drove the Alan Brown Galaxie in the next race at Brands Hatch, and he won. For round 9, Sears switched to the Wilmot team's new Lotus Cortina, and the Galaxie was driven by South African racer Bob Althoff, and Althoff won. Dan Gurney had a turn in the Alan Brown Galaxie in round 10, and he won. Graham Hill was driving the Wilmot car in this race, and he finished second. And in the final round at Snetterton, it was the turn of Jack Brabham to drive the Alan Brown Galaxie, and he won. Jack Sears finished 4th and was crowned the 1963 British Saloon Car Champion. So, from debut in round 5, Galaxies won every single remaining race. The 1964 British Saloon Car Championship was contested over 8 races, and Jim Clark was now driving the Team Lotus Cortina. He won 3 of the races, and the rest were won by Galaxies. Sears took 4 victories, and Jack Brabham won the other. But although Clark won 3 times, in all 3 cases he was trailing Sears when the Galaxie suffered a failure. One was an engine failure, one was brakes, and one was a blown tyre. And that was the end of the Galaxie reign. Jim Clark became the 1964 British Saloon Car Champion. For 1965, the Mustang arrived on the scene and several of the Ford teams switched to racing these instead. Alan Hutchison drove the ex-Alan Brown Galaxie in 3 races, but he didn't really feature. For 1966, the BSCC switched to FIA Group 5 regs. Now these regs allowed a lot more freedom. And suddenly, the Galaxie was back in the frame. Aussie racer Brian Muir drove the Wilmot Galaxie for most of the season. Only, this wasn't the Wilmot car from 1963 and 64. It was actually the Gawain Bailey car. Now Muir finished second in round 1, and then in round 2, he won. But that was the last Galaxie race win in the British Saloon Car Championship. And in fact, Galaxies didn't compete in the BSCC beyond 1966. So, what happened to them? Well, the Ford of France car went to Alan Mann Racing in England after it had done the Tour de France. It was used for Girling disc brake development, and Alan Mann himself drove it in a one-off race at Karlskoga in Sweden in 1964. Bill Shepherd purchased this Galaxie in 2008. Now Bill has been a long-time Cobra racer and has some pretty epic historic cars in his collection. His son Fred has become one of the leading authorities on the Group 2 Galaxies, and he has amassed an incredible archive. In fact, Fred has helped me enormously with putting this story together. Now the Galaxie was in pretty bad shape when Bill bought it, but Alan Mann himself was able to identify this as the Ford of France car. It's currently being restored, but this is not the Galaxie that the Shepherd family race at Goodwood and other historic racing events. The John Wilmot Galaxie, the first one, is alive and well. It went to South Africa in late 1963 to contest the Kyalami 9 Hours and several other touring car races there. It took several race victories and was driven by Sears and Paul Hawkins. It returned to South Africa again in late 1964 after the BSCC had finished, and Bob Althoff bought the car in 1965. He won the 1965 South African Touring Car Championship with the Galaxie. He retired it from racing in early 1966 and he kept it until 1988. And then it was sold to Jack Sears. Now Sears had it fully and accurately restored back to its original Group 2 guise, but without the roll cage. And it actually came up for sale a couple of years ago at a Bonhams auction. Now, as mentioned earlier, the Alan Brown Galaxie was sold off at the end of 1964 and raced in 1965 by Alan Hutchison. And aside from its BSCC appearances, it also entered the non-championship British Grand Prix support race. Unfortunately, Hutchison had a massive shunt in practice, and it hasn't been seen since, so we can probably assume it's been written off. And finally, the Gawain Bailey car. Bailey raced the Galaxie in the 1963 and 64 British Saloon Car Championships, plus the 1963 Tour de France Auto. He also raced it in South Africa and in Australia from late 1964. He shared it with Lex Davison in a 6-hour endurance race at Sandown Park. Now, Davison had previously raced an earlier model Galaxie that Holman-Moody were also involved with. Anyway, at Sandown, Davison crashed the Galaxie when it ran out of brakes. Actually, it crashed twice in that race, but it was repaired and sold to Aussie racer John Rayburn, and he raced it in the 1965 Australian Touring Car Championship. This was a one-race championship, which in 1965 was held at Sandown. Rayburn qualified second to Bob Jane in a Mustang, but he suffered brake troubles in the race and drifted back to 5th at the finish. The media were actually quite amused by Sir Gawain manhandling the massive Galaxie during his Australian tour. In fact, they referred to him as the only knight to drive his own castle. Anyway, with the British Saloon Car Championship now switching to Group 5 regs for 1966, and the Wilmot Galaxie now residing in South Africa, the Wilmot team purchased the Bailey Galaxie from John Rayburn. After its strong start to the championship, Muir stuck it really hard in the wall at Alton Park, and it appears it was deemed too far gone, and thus it was written off. So there you have it. 4 cars are known to have been built and 2 are known to still survive. And among the superstar drivers to have piloted the Galaxies were Jim Clark, Jack Brabham, Graham Hill and Denny Hulme. And between them, these 4 drivers won 8 Formula One World Championships. And while Dan Gurney's Impala was the first American car to impact the British Saloon Car Championship, the Holman-Moody Galaxies changed it forever. Anyway folks, that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed this little video. If you did, please hit the like button and the subscribe button and hit that little bell thingy so you get a notification when I post up a new video. Anyway, thanks again. We will catch you next time. Cheers. Bye bye.